This is the story of a man who had convinced himself that he was finished with being seen. A man who had everything the world tells you to want and had quietly, invisibly, lost the only thing that had ever mattered. His name was Ethan Hale, 42 years old. The kind of man whose name appeared in financial headlines and whose decisions moved billions of dollars across markets. From the outside, he was successful in every way a person is supposed to measure success. From the inside, he was a room that had been emptied and never refilled. And the thing about empty rooms is that they echo. Every sound comes back to you louder and colder than it left. For 5 years in a row, every single Christmas Eve, Ethan drove past his dark, silent penthouse, past the restaurants full of laughing strangers, past the shop windows draped in lights and tinsel, and he parked outside the Sicky Children's Hospital. He never went inside. He never spoke to anyone. He sat on a cold bench near the entrance and let the full weight of everything he had lost press down on him. And he endured it the way a person endures a physical wound, waiting for it to pass so he could go back to pretending it didn't exist. Psychologists who study grief have a specific term for what Ethan experienced every December 24th. They call it an anniversary reaction. It is a predictable, measurable spike in emotional pain that occurs on dates the body and mind have marked as significant. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. The calendar you keep in your head isn't the same as the one on your wall. Your nervous system keeps its own record, and no amount of willpower, professional achievement, or deliberate distraction can override it. Ethan didn't know the clinical term. He only knew that every year on this particular night, the absence of his wife Clara became so heavy it stopped feeling emotional and started feeling physical, like pressure building on his chest from the inside, like something demanding to be acknowledged that he had spent 12 months refusing to acknowledge. Clara had been the kind of person who made ordinary moments feel like occasions worth remembering. Hot cocoa that was always slightly too sweet. Christmas music she sang along to, always slightly off-key, with complete and total commitment to every wrong note. A warmth that came off her so naturally that the rooms she left seemed measurably colder after she walked out of them. When illness took her, just 3 years into their marriage, it didn't only take her. It took every version of a future they had been building together inside their imaginations, every Christmas they hadn't yet lived, every ordinary Tuesday evening that would now never exist. Here is what most people don't understand about profound grief until they're inside it. It isn't only about the person who is gone, it's about the entire parallel universe that collapsed with them, the life that will never happen, the moments that will never exist. That is what Ethan was carrying. He had tried to outrun it the way high-achieving people always try to outrun the things that frighten them most. He worked harder. He expanded his company into new markets. He filled his schedule so completely that on some days he didn't stop moving from 6 in the morning until midnight. Psychologists call this pattern avoidant coping. And while it can look exactly like strength and ambition from the outside, what it actually is, underneath all the productivity and momentum, is exhaustion wearing the costume of drive. It is the mind refusing to process what the heart is trying to tell it. And here is the critical thing to understand about avoidant coping. Eventually, the body and the heart present their invoice. Every emotion you refuse to process today becomes a debt with interest. Ethan had been running up that debt for 5 years. Christmas Eve had become his reckoning. The one night a year the armor had to come off, even if just for a few hours. Snow was falling the way it only falls on nights that feel like they belong to a different era entirely. Slow, deliberate, almost cinematic, each flake taking its time as if the sky understood the weight of the evening. The hospital lights threw a pale gold glow across the pavement. Ethan sat with his hands loose in his lap, watching snow collect on his shoes, and after a long silence, he did something he had never done before on any of the previous 5 years. He said something out loud,
"Clara, I miss you." 4 words, and here is why it matters more than it might seem. There is a documented psychological principle around the act of spoken declaration during grief. Therapists know it. Writers understand it. Ancient traditions across cultures are built around it. When you speak a truth you have been carrying silently, you do something the internal voice cannot do alone. You make it real in the external world. Spoken words carry weight differently than thoughts. They close the gap between what you are experiencing and what you are willing to acknowledge. The moment Ethan's voice broke on those 4 words, something cracked open in him. A single tear escaped. He didn't bother wiping it away. There was no one to see it. Or so he believed. "Excuse me?" The voice was so small that he almost missed it entirely in the wind.
He turned. Standing beside the bench was a little girl of approximately 6 years old. She wore a pink coat that had clearly been purchased for someone several sizes larger, the sleeves engulfing her hands almost completely. Her cheeks were flushed deep red from the cold, but her eyes were steady and clear and carried in them the kind of unfiltered, uncalculated seeing that most adults spend decades trying to relearn after the world has taught them to stop doing it. "You're crying," she said. Not an accusation, not pity, not even sympathy exactly. Simply an observation offered in the direct, judgment-free way that only children can offer things before they learn the complicated social architecture adults build around every interaction. The hedging, the softening, the careful performance of concern without actually engaging with it. Ethan wiped his face quickly. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," she said, and the calm certainty in her voice was the kind that stops a person cold. People who feel alone always say that. Pause on that for a moment, because it deserves to be paused on. A 6-year-old just articulated, without any training, without any therapy, without any self-help books, something that takes most adults years to truly understand about themselves and others. "I'm fine" is not a report on your condition. It is a request. It is a request to not be seen, to not be approached, to be allowed to continue suffering without interruption. It is a wall built in real time, and most adults, having learned the social rules, will respect that wall and keep walking. Children haven't learned those rules yet. They walk right through the wall as if it isn't there, because for them, it genuinely isn't. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, because it was the only thing he could think to say. "Ava," she said, with a small, proud lift of her chin. "And you're Mr. Lonely." He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a choke. "That's not my name. But that's how you feel," she said, simply. There is a field of psychology called interpersonal neurobiology, and one of its most consistent findings across decades of research is this: human beings are not fundamentally wired for success, for security, or for comfort. They are fundamentally wired for connection. When that connection is absent, the nervous system doesn't metaphorically experience it as a threat. It literally processes social pain through the same neural pathways that process physical pain. Loneliness hurts the way a wound hurts. It degrades the immune system. It shortens life expectancy in measurable, documented ways. Ethan had been quietly bleeding from that wound for 5 years, convincing himself and everyone around him that he was fine, that he was strong, that he didn't need anything. Ava saw through it in approximately 30 seconds. "How do you know?" he asked her. She pointed at his chest, her sleeve-covered hand making the gesture somehow even more earnest. "Because your heart is sad. I can see it." Then she reached out and took his hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his with a completeness and a confidence that disarmed him so entirely that he didn't even think to pull away. She didn't ask permission, she didn't hesitate. She simply gave him what she could see he needed, the way children give things before the world teaches them to calculate the cost of generosity first. "You need a hug," she said, in the tone of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. And before Ethan could fully process what was happening, she hugged him. small arms wrapping around his arm, her head barely reaching his shoulder, and the warmth of her cut through every wall he had spent 5 years carefully constructing, brick by brick, disappointment by disappointment. He closed his eyes. He breathed, and for the first time in longer than he could reliably remember, the noise inside his head went completely quiet. Here is something you can take directly from this moment and apply to your own life starting today. We dramatically underestimate the power of physical presence. Not words, not advice, not solutions or strategies or carefully chosen wisdom. Presence. Research on human connection has found that something as simple as a hand placed on a person's shoulder during a moment of distress measurably reduces the physiological stress response. The nervous system responds to the proximity of another human body the way a compass responds to north. It orients, it slows, it remembers what it is and what it belongs to. Ava had no advice, she had no answers, she had no solution to anything Ethan was carrying. What she had was the willingness to be there, and it was more powerful than anything in that moment could have been. Ava stepped back and studied him with those serious, clear eyes. "No one should be alone on Christmas Eve," she said. Ethan swallowed. "I don't have anyone." Ava smiled, and it was the kind of smile that contains solutions. "That's okay." She pointed toward the hospital entrance behind her. "My mom's inside. She works here. You can borrow her." Ethan stared. "What?" "She gives the best hugs," Ava said, entirely serious, as if this were the most practical and obvious solution in the world. "She makes people feel better. She can help you too." "Why would you offer me that?" His voice came out rough. Ava considered this for a moment, the way children consider things, without the social anxiety that makes adults hedge and qualify every honest answer. "Because you look like you need a mom today, and my mom says we should always help sad people." Something happened inside Ethan's chest in that instant that he had no language for or no category to place it in. This child, who clearly had very little in any material sense, who wore a borrowed coat and waited outside a hospital alone on Christmas Eve, was offering him the most precious thing she owned. She was offering him access to her world. She was offering him her person, and she was doing it without hesitation, without calculation, without any apparent awareness that this was an extraordinary act of generosity. Researchers and sociologists who study human generosity have documented a paradox across virtually every culture they have examined. They call it the generosity of scarcity. The finding is consistent and counterintuitive. People who have the least tend to give most freely. The people who are most fluent in the language of enough are almost never the people who have excess. They are almost always the people who understand from lived experience that connection and presence are not things that deplete when shared. They multiply. Ava had almost nothing by any material measure, and she was giving without a single moment of hesitation. Before Ethan could respond, the hospital doors burst open and a nurse rushed out with urgency written clearly across her face. "Ava, there you are." Ava turned. Something in the nurse's expression made the little girl go very still. "Ava, your mom fainted. We're taking her to the emergency room right now." Ethan was on his feet before the sentence was finished. "What happened?" The nurse looked at him, thrown off by the quiet authority in his voice. "She's been working double shifts for weeks. She collapsed from exhaustion." Ava's eyes filled in an instant, and every bit of the confidence, the warmth, the calm and steady certainty that had been so extraordinary in her, all of it dissolved in a single second. What remained was exactly what she was underneath all that surprising wisdom. A small child terrified of losing her mother. "Mommy,"
Mommy's hurt." She reached for Ethan's hand, and he gave it without a single thought. "Please," she whispered, "please come with me. Mommy needs us." Notice what she said. Not, "Mommy needs help." Not, "I need you to come." She said, "Mommy needs us." In the middle of her fear, in the worst moment of her evening, this child had already incorporated Ethan into her world. She had already moved him from stranger to something else, something she didn't have a precise word for yet, but that she was treating with total certainty. Us. She said us. Without a single thought about how this looked, or what it meant, or where any of it was going, Ethan lifted Ava into his arms, held her against his chest, and walked through those hospital doors. Inside, they were guided to the emergency room, where Lily, Ava's mother, lay unconscious on a bed, surrounded by the steady sound of monitors. She was in her early 30s. Even in her pallor, even in her stillness, her face carried something that registered immediately as deep, natural kindness, the kind that isn't performed, the kind that is simply what a person is. Ava reached toward her mother and cried out in a voice that contained everything, all the love and terror a small person can hold at once. "Mommy, Mommy, wake up!" The doctor was calm and direct. Lily was severely dehydrated and physically depleted. Her body had simply refused to continue under the accumulated weight she had been placing on it. She was stable. She needed IV fluids, rest, and time. Ethan listened to every word without moving. Then, quietly, why was she working double shifts? The doctor hesitated. There are protocols around patient privacy. But something about the way Ethan stood there holding a crying child who had no one else in the room made him answer. She's a single mother. She refused to take Christmas off. She wanted to earn enough to buy her daughter a gift. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She did that for me? Ethan kneeled down until he was eye level with her. He looked at her directly. She loves you more than her own health, more than her own comfort, more than rest. That is what a mother's love actually looks like when it isn't just a feeling, but a choice made over and over again. Ava cried then, in the full, unguarded way that children cry before the world teaches them that there is something undignified about letting people see the full extent of what they feel. She pressed her face into Ethan's shoulder and sobbed, and he held her. This man who had not held anyone in 5 years, this man who had constructed walls around every soft place inside himself with extraordinary discipline and efficiency. He held this small, grieving child and rocked her gently, and something that had been frozen for a very long time began, quietly, to move.
"I want to help her," Ava said through her tears. "I don't want her to be tired anymore." Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to write one of the most important books of the 20th century about human resilience. His central finding, drawn from the most extreme circumstances imaginable, was this: what separates people who endure from people who collapse is not strength in the conventional sense, not toughness, not stoicism. It is meaning, the presence of a reason, something that answers the question of why surviving matters. Frankl wrote that a person can endure almost any suffering if they have a sufficient reason to endure it. Ethan had money, power, and the respect of the professional world. What he had lost was any reason that felt like enough. And then a 6-year-old girl said, "I want to help her." And something deep inside him, something that had been sitting in the dark for 5 years, recognized that sentence and answered it. When a nurse explained that visiting hours had ended and Ava would need to leave, Ava turned to Ethan with an expression of pure, concentrated desperation. "Please don't let them take me away from her." Ethan stood up straight. He looked at the nurse with a calmness that carried weight. She stays. The nurse began to explain hospital policy. Ethan reached into his jacket and set his Foundation ID beside her. What the nurse didn't know, what almost no one knew, because Ethan had made a deliberate point of keeping it out of the news, was that his foundation had funded the entire pediatric wing of this hospital 3 years ago. He had done it quietly, without a press release, in the first Christmas after Clara died, when grief had produced in him an energy so enormous and so unbearable that he had needed somewhere to put it. He had put it here. "This little girl is not leaving her mother," Ethan said, quietly, absolutely. The nurse looked at the ID for a long moment, then she nodded and stepped back. Ava stared at him as though he had just casually rearranged the laws of physics. "Mister, why are you helping us?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he answered, it was simply and without performance. "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it more than I knew. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, I remembered what that felt like, and I understood that the only worthy response to having received kindness is to pass it forward. This is not merely a sentiment. Social psychologists have documented what they call upstream reciprocity, the measurable, consistent tendency of people who have received genuine kindness to extend kindness to others, including total strangers, even when there is no personal benefit involved and no social expectation of reciprocity. Kindness is not just emotionally contagious, it is behaviorally contagious. It moves through people and between people the way warmth moves through a connected system. Ava's small, fearless act of sitting down beside a crying man and refusing to leave him alone had already set something in motion that neither of them could yet see the full shape of. Hours passed. Ava fell asleep eventually, curled in Ethan's lap with one small hand still loosely wrapped around her mother's. Ethan did not move, not when his legs ached, not when his back stiffened, not when the hospital grew quieter and the night pressed in around them like something patient. He stayed. He stayed because for the first time in 5 years, being somewhere felt more important than going anywhere else. For the first time in 5 years, there was a somewhere that wanted him in it. When Lily's eyes finally opened, they found the hospital ceiling first, then their daughter sleeping peacefully, then, and here her expression changed, a man she had never seen before, sitting beside her bed in an expensive coat, with exhausted eyes and an expression of such unguarded relief that it was almost startling to see on a face clearly more accustomed to composure. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Ethan," he said quietly. "You fainted. Ava found me outside. I brought her in and I stayed." Lily processed this slowly, the way you process things when you have just come back to consciousness and the world is still piecing itself back together around you. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want her to be frightened." "Stop apologizing," Ethan said. His voice was not harsh, but it was firm in a way that carried something underneath the words, something that sounded, if you were paying the right kind of attention, like recognition, like one person who had been carrying everything alone for too long, recognizing that quality in another without needing it to be explained. "I just wanted her to have something special," Lily said softly. "I only had enough for one gift. I thought if I pushed through one more shift—" "You don't owe me an explanation," Ethan said. "You don't owe anyone one. There is something worth naming about what is happening in this exchange. 2 people, each carrying the full, unsupported weight of their separate lives. 2 people who had become expert at appearing to be fine when they were not. 2 people who, through entirely different circumstances, had arrived at the same place, alone in the particular way that is more than the absence of other people, alone in the sense of carrying more than one person was designed to carry without help. And in a small hospital room on Christmas Eve, they were simply being honest with each other, not performing, not calculating what the other person needed to hear, not managing how they were being perceived, just honest. And here is what that moment reveals about human beings that we so consistently forget.
Honesty between two people who were both exhausted and both afraid is not a risk. It is a relief so profound it registers in the body.
Ava awoke the way children always wake, all at once, like a light switched on, and the sound she made when her mother's open eyes was the sound of every held breath releasing at the same time. She climbed carefully onto the bed, and Lily gathered her in both arms, and they cried together without any self-consciousness or restraint. And Ethan sat beside them and felt something happening in his chest that he recognized distantly, as though through years of dust and silence, the careful, deliberate, irreversible melting of a wall. Ava wiped her face with the back of her hand, then turned and drew Ethan into the circle with the natural, uncomplicated authority of someone who has already decided that he belongs there. "Mommy, this is the man from outside. He was crying, and I let him borrow you." Lily turned pink instantly. "Ava, sweetheart." Ethan laughed, an actual laugh, warm and surprised and completely unguarded, coming from somewhere inside him that had been so quiet for so long that the sound of it surprised him. It was the laugh of a person who has just remembered that they are capable of it. "He saved me tonight," he said. Lily looked at him with genuine confusion. "She's 6. "I know," Ethan said, and then, quieter, more considered, "That's exactly why." And here is what the research on human resilience and recovery consistently finds, across decades of study, across cultures, across vastly different circumstances. The people who pull us back from our edges are almost never the ones we would have predicted. They are almost never the most powerful or the most credentialed or the most strategically positioned to help. They are most often the ones who simply see us clearly, without agenda, without hesitation, without the fear of what stopping will cost them, and respond to exactly what they see. Ava had no strategy, she had no resources, she had no framework for what she was doing. What she had was the clarity to see a person suffering and the courage to refuse to walk past it. That, more than any leadership philosophy or self-improvement system or motivational framework, is the most transferable, most actionable, most genuinely important thing this story contains. The next time you see someone sitting alone in the cold, or in a crowd, or in a meeting, or at a family dinner, and something in you registers that they are not fine, don't keep walking because you don't know what to say, or because it's inconvenient, or because you assume someone else will stop. Stop. Sit down. Say something true. Offer your hand. You have no idea, none at all, what it might save. Ava looked between her mother and Ethan with the expression of someone who has just successfully solved a complex logistical problem and is quietly pleased with the outcome. "Can we spend Christmas together, all 3 of us?" Lily's eyes moved immediately to Ethan. "Sweetheart, Ethan probably has his own—" "No," Ethan said. The room went quiet. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the kind of quiet that settles when something true has been said, and everyone present knows it, and no one wants to rush past it. "I want to spend Christmas with both of you," he said. Paused. When he continued, his voice carried a texture that had been entirely absent from it for 5 years. Open, undefended, no longer managed. "Tonight you gave me back something I had convinced myself was gone permanently." Ava tipped her head to one side with that earnest, unfiltered curiosity. "What's that, mister?" Ethan looked at her, then at Lily, then at the space between all 3 of them that felt improbably already like something he recognized. Something that had a shape and a warmth and a name he hadn't let himself use in a long time. "Family," he said softly. The words sat in the room. No one rushed to fill the silence that followed it.
Lily held his gaze for a long, careful moment, the gaze of a person who has learned to be careful, who has good reasons to be careful, who is, nevertheless, considering right now whether careful is what the moment actually calls for. Then she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "We'd be honored." Ava made a sound of pure, uncomplicated delight and threw both arms out as wide as they would go, pulling them together with the joyful, fearless energy of someone who has never learned to be ashamed of wanting good things or afraid of reaching for them. Outside, snow continued to fall. The hospital glowed warm against the dark sky. The city moved around them in its quiet Christmas rhythm, full of people searching, as people always are, on every night, and not only this one, for the thing that makes the darkness feel less permanent. Inside that small room, something had been built out of almost nothing, out of a cold bench and a chance encounter that very nearly didn't happen, out of a little girl who refused to walk past a man sitting alone in the cold because her mother had taught her that sad people deserve help, and she had not yet learned to make exceptions to that rule. Out of a man who had almost left, who had been pulling his coat tighter, already beginning the familiar process of shutting down and going home to his empty apartment, already a few seconds away from missing everything that came after. Out of a mother who had given every last piece of herself to protect her child and collapsed under the weight of that love. And here, if you want to carry something real from this story into the actual shape of your own life, is what it genuinely teaches. Grief that is not expressed does not stay still. It grows, it builds structure, it becomes architecture, walls, routines, habits of avoidance, entire identities built around never letting anyone close enough to see the damage. Ethan had not been incarcerated in his grief for 5 years because he was weak. He had been incarcerated because he had never allowed anyone close enough to help him carry it. If there is something you have been carrying in silence, and most people reading this are carrying something, there is almost certainly someone in your life who would share the weight if you would only reach towards them. The silence is not strength. Reaching is. Children are not innocent of wisdom. They are saturated with it. They simply haven't yet learned to hide it, qualify it, make it politically safe, or filter it through the anxiety of social performance. When a child in your life says something that stops you, something that lands with a directness and an accuracy that surprises you, don't dismiss it as simplicity. Pay attention. They are seeing you clearly, the way you used to see before the world taught you to look away. The most significant moments of your life are almost never announced in advance. Ethan was seconds of leaving that bench. A few more moments of hesitation, a slightly colder wind, and he would have gone home and missed everything that came after. The doors to the rest of your life rarely look like doors. They look like inconveniences. They look like moments you almost skip. Pay attention to what is trying to reach you before you close yourself off to it. Generosity is not a function of what you have. It is a function of what you notice and what you choose to do with what you notice. Ava had nothing material to offer. She offered everything she possessed: her presence, her perception, her willingness to act immediately on what she saw. That is always available to you, today, right now, regardless of your circumstances, your account balance, your schedule, or your own pain. You always have the capacity to stop, to see, and to stay. And perhaps most importantly of all, the life you are actually meant to be living is almost never behind the wall you have built to protect yourself from being hurt again. It is on the other side of the moment you decide, consciously, deliberately, despite everything that taught you not to let someone in. That decision is frightening every single time. It is also the only decision that leads anywhere worth going. On the one night the whole world collectively dedicates to the possibility that extraordinary things can happen to ordinary people, a CEO who had run out of reasons, a nurse who had run out of energy, and a little girl in an oversized pink coat who somehow had run out of neither. They found something that all three of them had been quietly searching for without fully knowing they were searching at all. They found each other, and on a night when the whole world was looking for something to make it feel less alone, that was not a small thing. That, in fact, was everything.